The Namdong Industrial Complex in Incheon, South Korea is a grid of commerce and labor factories. It's a place of concrete, steel, and the monotonous hum of machinery. A place there really isn't a reason to visit unless you're working there. On the last day of May 2014, a factory worker finishing his long shift went outside to get some fresh air, but he smelled something in the air, something that wasn't the smoky metallic fog he was used to. Something cloying, fetid, the smell of decay. He didn't know that at the time, though. He followed it around the corner to find a large black duffel bag abandoned near the factory wall. It was immediately concerning because it was surrounded by a swarm of flies. Driven by an overwhelming sense of curiosity, he unzipped the bag. Inside, wrapped in cheap red fabric and sheets of plastic, was the naked upper torso of a man. The body was severed just below the pelvis. It wasn't a clean cut. The work was crude, suggesting that this had been done with brute force rather than some kind of surgical precision. The dismemberment was not what had killed him, as the police would uncover. The torso was riddled with deep stab wounds. That meant the frenzied attack had been personal. Tangled in the plastic wrapping, the police would later find two critical pieces of evidence. Two pieces of evidence that would define the entire investigation. A single strand of hair, nearly 50 centimeters long, and a small, broken piece of a manicured fingernail. Welcome to Korean True Crime with me, your host, Mimi Mizuko. Thank you to my amazing patrons for making this show possible. You can support Korean True Crime on Patreon today. You can also join us on Discord for movie nights featuring films based on real crimes. If you would like to chat with me or other listeners, join us on Discord. Warning, today's episode contains descriptions of violence and some descriptions of body dismemberment. Listener discretion is advised. The first task of the Incheon Namdong police was to find the identity of the man in the duffel bag. Forensic technicians lifted a clean set of fingerprints off of the man's hands and they got a match in the national database. The victim was a 50-year-old married man who worked as a freelance programmer. He has been given the pseudonym Kim Hyun-sung. For 4 days, his wife had been waiting for him to come home. She'd gone through the stages of fear and dread that accompany a missing loved one. She filed a missing persons report on May 27th after telling the police her husband left home the day before, May 26th. He had left home to go to a job interview in Seoul, but from what the police would discover, he never arrived, and they couldn't find any evidence of a job interview. After a brief period of activity in Seoul, his phone was shut off. His last known cell phone signal, however, was not from Seoul, but from Paju, a city to the north of Seoul. Paju really isn't a place you'd end up on accident. It's really close to the DMZ. He didn't know anyone who lived in Paju as far as his friends and family knew of, and no one could think of a reason he'd even travel there on a whim. Paju being so close to the DMZ made his disappearance there a very ominous place for the trail to go cold. A police patrol soon located his car parked on the roadside shoulder near the Odusan Unification Observatory. His car was locked, and the preliminary search showed no signs of a struggle. The car was undamaged, no tire marks on the road from a second vehicle, no footprints leading into the brush. The inside of his car was clean, and nothing seemed to be out of the ordinary. But investigators noticed Kim Hyun-sung's car had a black box. You'd probably have a hard time finding a car in Korea that doesn't have a front and rear black box camera. And for the investigation's sake, thank goodness, they were able to pull up data on the SIM card and watched the drive until Kim Hyun-sung pulled over at the shoulder. Then, manually, deliberately, the recording device was turned off. The detective suggested this might mean he didn't want anyone to see where he went next, obviously, but maybe he didn't want to reveal who he was meeting with. They had nothing else to learn from his vehicle. Police back in Incheon, where the duffel bag was discovered, obtained the CCTV footage from the factory. This was more fruitful than the car. The footage showed a single car stop near the factory and idle for about 7 minutes during the late hours of May 30th before pulling away. The body was found the next morning. Unfortunately, the car was facing the CCTV and had their high beams on, meaning the glare from the headlights made it impossible to see what happened during those 7 minutes. It made the car, the license plate, and the driver invisible. It's unlikely the driver knew this exact spot to stop to blind the camera, but it's also possible they did know. Crimes typically aren't this well planned, though, so the police were at a loss. This is where the story kind of shifts from a missing persons case to a masterclass in forensic investigation. They couldn't just do a simple zoom and enhance like they do on forensic shows. They had to bring in a team of video analysts to undertake a huge task. They needed to learn something from the footage. They were going to identify the vehicle by measuring the pixel distance between the headlights, calculate the height of the light sources, and compare the unique shape of the headlight beams against a massive database of vehicle specifications. This was not going to be a fast process, but slowly they were able to narrow it down. They identified the car finally as a silver Chrysler Sebring. This wasn't exactly a rare vehicle, so this wasn't a significant step in the case, but it was the only lead they had. The DNA evidence they found on the man wasn't a match for anyone in the criminal database, so in the meantime, they were just searching for the car. In the CCTV footage, for only one singular frame, as the car turned away, there was a small dent seen on the fender, like a fingerprint. They could narrow down cars using this. With a make, model, and this identifying dent, they started their search using the Paju vehicle registry. In the meantime, another team of officers were set on analyzing the victim's call logs, which had just come in. As they did that, the other officers were filtering for every registered silver Chrysler Sebring in the region. They sent officers out to go find the owners like a glass slipper. They went through the list of vehicles down from hundreds to dozens until they finally came upon one that was registered to a 36-year-old woman living in Paju. She had a fender dent matching the footage. But they didn't locate her because of the car. No, they first came across her name in Kim Hyun-sang's last phone calls. Her name was Go Mi-suk. The investigation now had its prime suspect. With her name and address, they started to build a profile on her while they sent officers to locate her. She didn't have a criminal record, and she seemed quite average. The deeper they dug into Go Mi-suk's life, the odder the story got. Who was this woman really? And could she really be responsible for the dismembered torso they found in a duffel bag? Or was she simply the person who dropped it off? The answer they soon discovered was that her life was a study on cognitive dissonance. She was two people, living both lives desperately. The first Go Mi-suk, the real one, was in a rough patch. She was 36 years old, unemployed, and drowning in debt. Court records showed she was struggling to repay a 50 million won loan that she was repeatedly behind on the installment payments for. The loan was for her car, the very same car that identified her, and her primary source of income wasn't any form of steady employment or freelancing, but instead from 조근 만남, which is a newer term for escorts or sex workers who operate through the internet. Officially, all sex work is illegal in Korea, including live models or video stars. You might see 조근 만남 on various dating apps, or even through KakaoTalk, a messenger app. It's often abbreviated to avoid censorship in the Korean letters jiut, gyuk, or what we might call J and G. 조근 만남 specifically means conditional meeting. Money exchanges are done online prior to the meeting under the excuse of paying the person back for coffee or tutoring or any such excuse. This kind of sex work can lead to having regular customers that become your one and only customer, kind of like a sugar daddy. Go Mi-suk was pretty. She was also the inspiration for the titular role in the Korean black comedy thriller Mask Girl. Her sex work as a precarious, often dangerous hustle was meeting people from the internet with sometimes unsafe intentions. But to the digital world, she was presenting herself as a woman who had made it in life. Go Mi-suk's online feed was filled with reels, shorts, and TikToks of a life she wasn't actually living. Here she was posing with Chanel bags on a golf course or smiling from a first-class seat on an overseas trip, none of which she actually owned or went on. The truth of this online performance was discovered when investigators knocked on her door and saw inside her apartment. She had perfectly curated an online facade of wealth and luxury, and it was all a lie. Inside her apartment was unopened boxes of luxury goods stacked delicately on top of each other. She had all of these props to sell that she was living a luxurious life, and all of it was fake. Her digital performance was just that, a performance for strangers she didn't even know. Behind the screen, she was deeply unhappy. No close friends, no family to speak of. Her contacts were just a list of clients she saw and performed for too. Did anyone really know who she was? Because she had built her entire life on transactions rather than friendship or meaningful relationships. Her life was hollow, and a hollow life is a very fragile one. Just 4 months prior, in February 2014, she had the only financial stability kicked out from beneath her. For some time, she had been in a long-term sugar arrangement with a client that we can only identify as Mr. Kang. But he was more than just a client to her. He was her entire financial stability. The money he paid her was keeping her afloat. And then one day, he just cut her off, abruptly. For Go Mi-suk, this wasn't just money, it was the destabilization of her entire existence. Faced with losing the ability to keep up her online persona, or actually achieving wealth, she spiraled. She was now alone, in debt, facing eviction, with a lot of displaced anger. For a woman with such a fragile, externally validated sense of self, losing this client wasn't just a loss, but a rejection that led to her having profound feelings of resentment and emotional instability. For the next few months, leading up to the day the police knocked on her door, she had been planning to hurt a man the way she had been hurt, in some distorted sense. On May 25th, 2014, 6 days prior to the duffel bag's discovery, the day before Kim Hyun-sung's disappearance, she went searching online for a new sugar daddy. She started putting out the usual posts with seductive pictures of herself enticing men to take the bait. These posts probably get dozens, if not dozens, of replies, most going nowhere. But one response came from a 50-year-old man she had never met. She replied, "Let's be lovers who cherish each other forever." It was a front for agreeing to meet him. The intimate language was to throw off the police, since this sex work is illegal. After a series of calls and texts, a meeting time and place was set, the Odusan Unification Observatory. The next day, May 26th, Kim Hyun-sung lied to his wife. He told her he was going in for a job interview, when in reality, he was meeting with Go Mi-suk. I don't look down on any form of sex work, especially survival sex work. We can criticize people within professions while still abstaining from morally judging a means to make money. But Go Mi-suk did not have the intentions of merely making money from this encounter. And Kim Hyun-sung, well, he was lying and cheating on his wife. That's disgusting behavior, but in no way excuses what was done to him. When Kim Hyun-sung arrived to the agreed-upon meeting point near the Odusan Unification Observatory, he pulled his car over to the side of the road and did the last conscious act of his life. He reached to unplug the vehicle's black box recorder. Everything we know coming after has been pieced together by the investigation or interviews with Go Mi-suk. She arrived shortly afterwards, and Kim Hyun-sung got into the passenger seat of the silver Chrysler Sebring. The articles mentioned the make of her car so often I wondered what importance it had about her identity. It looks just like a regular sedan to me, but maybe when it came out it was a nicer car. It's an import car in Korea, and it seems like when these cars came out they were on the pricier side of sedans. If you know much about cars, let me know on Discord or any of my socials. I'm interested to know if this car was just another thing she couldn't afford to keep up the appearance of being luxury. Anyways, I think from now on, we can just call it a car. After Mi-suk picked him up, their destination was just a short drive away, 10 minutes. It was an unmanned self-service love motel in Paju. These establishments are pretty common in South Korea, although they're definitely changing their branding in recent years. They're built for discretion with enclosed parking so no one can see who's getting out of the cars. Mi-suk and Hyun-sang checked into a room at 5:22 p.m. An hour later, the motel CCTV outside captured the victim, Hyun-sang, leaving the motel room alone, on foot. He had been sent out for drinks, so he walked to a nearby convenience store and bought a bottle of soju and some beer before returning. After he returned to the motel, he was never seen again. As soon as he returned, Mi-suk's seductive escort persona was dropped as she raised a knife from her purse. She was holding a 30-centimeter sashimi knife pointed right at him. It was incredibly sharp, to cut like butter through fish or flesh. The attack wasn't preceded by a fight or an argument. There was no escalation. No, Go Mi-suk charged at him as his back was turned and stabbed him. She continued to stab him as he fell, and even after the life left his eyes. She would remain in her frenzied rage for so long. She stabbed him 41 times, 26 times to his upper body, 15 to his legs and lower abdomen. The coroner's report included details about the sheer force of many of these stab wounds. The very first puncture she had done to his back went straight through his body and perforated his liver. He didn't even have time to react to the attack, and that was clear because his body was devoid of any defensive wounds, except for a small scrape on his left hand. She didn't stop until she finally lost stamina. With Kim Hyun-sang dead on the tiled floor, Go Mi-suk stood up and finally felt relief. She didn't panic. She didn't start cleaning with a hurry. No, she just went down, swiped the card to book the room for 2 more days. And for 2 days, she stayed in that motel room with his dead body. She kept busy cleaning. She brought his body into the bathtub, cut his wrists and major arteries to drain all of his blood. This would take a lot of time though, and she knew that, so she cleaned herself up in the shower, freshened up her makeup, and turned her thoughts not to escape, but to opportunity. Kim Hyun-sang's body wasn't even cold yet by the time she decided to exploit his death. She grabbed his wallet and went out shopping. She drove to Ilsan, a city not far from Paju, and visited a jewelry store. She bought herself a nice ring and a necklace worth around 3 million won, or a little bit more than $2,000. The transaction was approved and her face lit up. So she said, "You know what? I'd like to see a few more items in the store." This time she picked out pieces worth 5 million won. The jewelry store owner said he did notice the cards were in a man's name. And although women using their husband's credit cards isn't unheard of, Go Mi-suk's demeanor was incredibly intense, like she had just won the lottery. She was ecstatic. The store owner was suspicious, but rather than cause a scene, he just decided to make a note of it. That's when the next transaction was declined. She apologized profusely, blaming it on her husband, then fled the store with the jewelry she had already purchased. By the time the card was locked by that second transaction, she had already racked up 22 million won in charges from other stores. That credit card was the only one he had, so she returned to the motel to deal with the body. She started thinking about what she would need to get rid of. The next day, the 28th, she head out to the hardware store and calmly bought a small electric saw, 2 black duffel bags, rolls of plastic sheeting, some thick packing cord straps, and a foldable hand cart. I really wonder what the cashier was thinking when she checked out, because all of that together does seem odd. You ever think about that? Almost all of these killers visit some kind of hardware store or grocery store to buy hammers, knives, duct tape, usually in the days prior. If I worked at a hardware store, I would probably have a hard time not being suspicious of everyone's purchases all of the time. The prosecutor and police would then use this hardware store shopping trip to solidify that this attack was premeditated, despite the purchases happening post-murder. She was calmly buying these items, so it's difficult to believe that she had actually killed him in a spur of the moment using a sashimi knife she brought with her, although she would argue she always carried the knife for protection from bad clients. After returning to the motel room, she set up the plastic sheeting and started the task of dismembering his body. Now, using a chainsaw in a motel, isn't someone going to hear that? Well, I can't find the exact motel that the murder took place in. Obviously, this is protected information, not to hurt the business. But I was able to find some drive-in love motels in Paju. This was a drive-in love motel. Now, I've never seen these, but they're more luxurious and expensive kind of love motel typically. You drive up to the hotel that looks like a bunch of garage doors below apartments. Each garage is below the motel room the visitors get. So your motel room isn't sharing a wall with another guest. And typically the motel rooms are really large. They have living rooms, private rooftops. I'll include some pictures on my video version of the episode, or you can just search up Drive-In Love Motel Korea. These hotels are designed to be used as very private getaways, usually with sex workers, love affairs, or just people looking for privacy. So Go Mi-suk was in this tall rectangular box of a concrete building with insulated walls meant for hiding the noise of love-making and loud music. So no one heard the chainsaw that she was using through the night. Her method was just to bisect the body at the lower torso to make it easier to fit into the 2 bags. She could then use the hand cart to wheel the heavy bags to the car. Before placing the bodies in the bags, though, she wrapped them in plastic sheeting and then some red sheets that she had taken from the motel. She sprayed down the bathroom, not using bleach or any cleaning products, because she didn't think the police would ever suspect her or find out. Clearly, she hadn't thought that far. She placed the bags in her car and drove back to her apartment, just leaving them in her car. That day, May 29th, she went online again to set up another Chogunmanam meeting. She had a dead man in her car and she was going back to daily life like it was nothing. She had completely detached herself from what had happened. She even had the body in her car when she went to meet the client at the hotel. After leaving the hotel, she left that client still alive. That's when she began the disposal of Hyun-sung's body. She took his legs and lower abdomen to a rural farm ditch in Paju. She pulled over to the side of the road and in the dark, she pushed the bag out. Then she drove off. The torso would be taken much further south, to the Namdang Industrial Complex in Incheon. It's an interesting choice for disposal because during the day it's full of workers who would obviously find the bag, and the bag was merely discarded next to the factory wall. Maybe she wanted to play with the police. Maybe she wanted to be caught. Whatever the reason, the bag sat near the factory wall next to a narrow alley through the night. When the police finally moved in to arrest Go Mi-suk, they didn't find a woman in a state of panic or getting ready to go on the run. No, they found her at her apartment in Paju, calmly taking out the trash as if it was just another day. Her demeanor during her arrest can only be described as detached indifference. But once inside the interrogation room, she really couldn't keep her story straight. First, she was claiming self-defense. She said, she was a sex worker who had been attacked by a client who tried to sexually assault her. A story that is likely, but the investigators confronted her with the torso photos. How can you claim self-defense after 41 stab wounds? This is when the police knew they were dealing with someone truly evil. She wasn't in tears or in a panic. No, she started laughing when she saw the torso photos. She couldn't stop laughing and even had to take deep breaths to calm herself down. Maybe it was a nervous laugh that some people do when they're embarrassed or afraid, but it was so inappropriate it was scary. When she finally finished laughing, she decided to change her story immediately. She dropped the self-defense story and pretended to admit to a history of schizophrenia. She said her mental illness led to her having hallucinations that she couldn't resist, hallucinations that were giving her orders. And when she started having hallucinations, she also experienced dissociative fugue, or she went into a fugue state. This is essentially an incredibly rare temporary psychiatric condition where a person unexpectedly travels far away from home and temporarily assumes a new identity or personality. They act different than normal during this time, and it can last from hours to months in the most extreme of cases. If you're a Breaking Bad fan, you'll have heard of this as a defense for a person's actions before. And much like Walter White, Go Mi-suk did not truly experience these dissociative symptoms. The prosecutor ordered a full psychiatric evaluation, the results of which were unequivocal, while it was still acknowledged that Go Mi-suk seemed to have a personality disorder, one that the psychiatrist couldn't definitively diagnose. She did not seem to have any impairment in her ability to discern right from wrong or make decisions. She didn't seem to be suffering from any memory loss. They also concluded that even though she was in an unstable mental state at the time of the interviews, she didn't have schizophrenia or appear to be suffering from visual or auditory hallucinations. There's always a caveat, though, that the doctors can only report on what they learned from the few meetings they had with Go Mi-suk. So I looked into the court-ordered mental evaluations. Are they very thorough? Well, the primary objective of these in most countries is to determine whether or not the individual is fit to stand trial, not whether or not they have a mental illness. They're asking, are they mentally competent enough to stand trial? Not only does this discover if the person is incapable of discerning right from wrong, and therefore were incapable of knowing what they did was a crime. Insanity, however, is not a mental illness. It's a legal term. Insanity hasn't been used in medical settings for over a century. Insanity is used alongside idiocy, dementia, and mania, which now medical facilities use terms like psychosis and neurosis. So when the medical professional is conducting a psych eval, they're not really looking to diagnose the person with anything. They're figuring out, does this person have any mental illness or disability preventing them from comprehending the action's consequences? I've spoken in the past about this, about how many heinous criminals are given a psychopathy test to determine if the individual has antisocial personality disorder. I've had some very educational comments about what sociopathy and antisocial personality disorder are like and their history of being conflated with criminality. I apologize for not speaking about this aspect in previous episodes, but yes, Korean media and courts are very, very focused on a person's score that they get on the psychopathy test, and the media actually uses it more as an evil meter. Not all violent criminals even suffer from personality disorders. It's just easier for us to categorize what we're afraid of as evil, to put it into a box, because it's even scarier to think that a neurotypical person can be truly evil. Keep in mind that there's as much diversity in neurotypical people as there are in neurodivergent people. And so, Ko Mi-suk was declared competent to stand trial. When she failed to convince them of her insanity, she decided to just deny everything. The police took her to conduct the on-site crime reenactments, and she was a good actor. She could have had a good career in movies. She pretended she'd never even been there before, didn't even know where to stand, what to do, where to go. She was crying that she was being framed. She said, "There are bad people in the world and I really didn't do this." But the evidence was absolute. A piece of her fingernail had been found in the duffel bag. A strand of her long, long black hair was also found on the body. Her DNA was all over it. Blood was in her car. Her car was seen dumping the body at the factory. She had called the victim just minutes before his disappearance. She had used his credit card multiple times and was on the CCTV at the jewelry store. They had her red-handed. The prosecution brought a battery of charges against her: homicide, damage and abandonment of a corpse, larceny, and fraud. Her defense was entirely that she had diminished capacity, also known as impaired mental state. Her evaluation was read in court and it said there are no impairments in her ability to distinguish right from wrong or make decisions. So the judges rejected her claim entirely. The prosecution focused on her actions after the murder to show that she had been completely lucid and in control. Her actions were methodical, calculated, exploitative even. She was criminally culpable. On February 4th, 2015, the Incheon District Court sentenced Ko Mi-suk to 30 years in prison. She appealed the verdict, of course, but it was upheld. Finally, on July 23rd, 2015, the Supreme Court of South Korea rejected her last appeal, cementing her sentence. In their final judgment, the court cited the extremely brutal method of the crime and the profound lack of remorse she showed. They stated her decision to engage in sexual relations with another man while the victim's dismembered body was in her car was a particularly telling sign of her callousness. A severe punishment, they concluded, was inevitable and just. So we're left with the final unavoidable question: why? Why did Ko Mi-suk do this? The easy answer, the one the police initially pursued, was money, but that theory falls apart under scrutiny. The jewelry she bought and the money she stole were an afterthought, an opportunistic way to exploit the victim. The more compelling explanation is what we talked about earlier. This was an act of displaced anger. 4 months prior, her longtime client, Mr. Kang, cut her off. Her entire world collapsed beneath her. Her entire fragile identity was built on that external validation from online likes and views that make her feel like she truly was living that luxurious life that she was pretending to have. And after she lost her sugar daddy, that's when she started missing payments on her loan, going further into debt just to stay afloat. Kim Hyun-sang wasn't an innocent man, but he didn't deserve to die. He also wasn't the source of her anger. but a proxy for it, a target for it. This wasn't a murder for financial gain. No, it was misdirected therapy. She thought if she would kill someone like her sugar daddy who hurt her, she'd feel better. Ko Mi-suk's story is one of the most unsettling mysteries I've ever researched. It sounds like a TV drama villain hiding behind luxury brands online to be a monster behind it all. In reality, she was a broken person, a person who could laugh at pictures of a dismembered body, of a man she had just murdered. She was a person who was truly empty inside, and she was trying to fill herself up with money, purses, and clothes, but inside she was evil. And thankfully, she can't hurt anyone else. Ko Mi-suk is currently incarcerated at Cheonju Women's Prison. Her 30-year sentence means she might be released in 2045 for good behavior. At that point, she'll be 66 years old. I wonder if living a life so far removed from social media in prison will be good for her. There is a toxicity to the addiction of chasing likes and validation online. I know I've fallen victim to the darkness of caring so deeply about how I'm perceived online. If an episode doesn't perform well enough, is it a reflection of who I am? I hope you never have to worry about such silly things. What's most scary about this case is that the capability for such violence can be born from something so mundane as social media. And such evil can walk among us, completely unseen because it's hiding behind filters and smiles. Ko Mi-suk's case is an example of anomie. She lost her connection to society and lost her sense of moral guidance. She prioritized all of the wrong things in her life, and it led to her experiencing such profound anger and sadness that it consumed her. Her life became a vacuum of transactional relationships. When you step back and try to understand the why, you see how societal pressures shaped her. She became untethered from normal societal rules because her understanding of right and wrong was entirely formed by this false reality she had created. Her whole existence was split into this bizarre double feature where she was successful, but also isolated. The murder was simply the moment her two lives clashed together and she couldn't handle that kind of anger and despair. It's not an excuse, but an understanding of how violence and crime are almost always preventable with intervention. So take care of yourself. Take a step back from social media every once in a while, touch some grass, live your life. Thank you for joining me on Korean True Crime. If you enjoyed today's episode, please share it or leave a review. It truly helps out the pod. Check the description for a link to our Discord, Patreon, or to find new merch. Find my sources for free on Patreon. Thank you to my patrons for making this show possible. 다음에 또 봐요. See you next time.